My name is Patrice Hale, and I had spent 2 months preparing for my sister's wedding. I contacted the florist, adjusted the seating chart, handled last-minute calls from vendors, and even stayed up late tying each small ribbon onto the guest favors. I believed that if I tried hard enough, if I gave everything I could, then maybe this time I would feel like I truly belonged in the family instead of standing just outside of it. The Charleston waterfront ballroom glowed under warm golden light, the music blending with polished, careful conversations. Guests moved through the room in elegant attire, wearing polite smiles with sharp edges, the kind of smiles that made you feel every compliment was really a comparison. My sister stood near the head table, surrounded by guests leaning toward her, offering warm admiration to someone they viewed as perfect. I walked toward the place where my seat was supposed to be, expecting to find the name card I had prepared weeks ago. But when I reached the table, I stopped. The card in front of me was not what it should have been. Written clearly and boldly across it were the words, "Stupid, low-educated little sister." A few guests glanced at me with smiles that held no kindness. And then the room seemed to pause when a man walked in. He looked at the table, looked at the card, then at the faces around us. And he said something that changed everything. If you were standing in that moment with every gaze fixed on you, what would you do? Share your honest thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your answer. 2 months before the wedding, everything felt different. That was when the planning began, and I found myself at the center of every conversation, every decision, every moment that required someone to do the work no one else wanted to handle. Marissa, my older sister, had always been the person everyone seemed to revolve around, the kind of presence that filled a room without effort. Evan, her fiancé, carried himself with the polite confidence of someone accustomed to being admired, the kind of man who never raised his voice because he never needed to. Their wedding was destined to be grand, elegant, and unforgettable, and somehow the responsibility for that grandeur settled onto my shoulders. I was the one calling the Charleston waterfront ballroom, negotiating available dates between charity galas and corporate fundraisers, making sure the glass chandeliers would be polished and the riverside terrace would have enough heaters for the evening breeze. I scheduled the tasting session for the menu, reviewed floral samples in 3 different color palettes, and compared prices for linen textures that looked identical to everyone except me. Every time I updated Marissa, she would respond with the same tone, sweet on the surface, yet dismissive underneath, as though my effort was simply the natural order of things. "You know this means a lot to our family, right?" she would say. "It would just feel wrong if anyone but you helped me. You understand that." Evan would occasionally lean in during these conversations, offering a compliment that sounded polished and hollow. "You're doing great," he'd remark, but his eyes were already elsewhere, scrolling through his phone or admiring his watch. His approval felt like something delivered out of habit, not sincerity. It was as though the contributions I made existed only as background noise to their celebration. At home, the dynamic was no different. Mom reminded me repeatedly that I was the reasonable one, the one who could be counted on not to cause stress. She framed her words as parental wisdom, but the message was unmistakable. "Marissa has a lot on her mind. You know how much pressure she's under. Just help her. You're better at handling these things anyway, Patrice." The expectation had been set long before wedding invitations or flower arrangements. I had been raised to soften myself so others could shine. Dad stayed mostly silent, observing from the edges of conversations, always appearing as though he had thoughts he never spoke. He watched the way tasks accumulated on my shoulders, saw how exhaustion settled into my eyes, but whenever I caught his gaze, he simply offered a faint, tired smile. His silence didn't feel cruel, but it left me alone all the same. There were moments I questioned myself. I would sit in the car outside a supplier's showroom or stand in line at the craft store holding ribbon spools under my arm and wonder whether I was doing this out of love or habit. I told myself it was love, that this was what family was supposed to look like. I kept believing that if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself useful enough, then I could earn a seat that felt like mine. I wanted to be included, to belong, to be seen without being compared. No one ever said thank you. Not once. But I kept going because somewhere inside I hoped that effort mattered. 1 week before the wedding, the atmosphere began to shift in a way that I could feel more than I could explain. The checklist was nearly finished, the final confirmations were underway, and I thought this would be the stage where everyone expressed gratitude, or at least a sense of calm relief. Instead, subtle comments started slipping into conversations like small cuts I was expected to ignore. It began during a final tasting appointment for the reception menu. I suggested a lighter salad option since many guests had mentioned dietary preferences. Marissa did not respond to the idea itself. She simply smiled at the coordinator and said in a tone that sounded pleasant on the surface, "Patrice tries her best. She means well." The phrasing hung in the air. The implication was not about the salad. It was about me. I felt the coordinator's polite nod, the kind that acknowledges the conversation but does not challenge the hierarchy in the room. Later that afternoon, Evan reviewed the seating chart. He barely looked up and remarked, "It is interesting how some people find ways to stay involved in things they do not fully understand." The comment was not directed at any particular task. It was directed at me. His tone did not need to be sharp to land with force. It suggested that my effort was tolerated rather than valued. I attempted to push those moments aside. I told myself that planning a wedding could strain anyone. I convinced myself I was reading too much into casual remarks. Yet the comments continued in small, precise doses. Mom insisted that Marissa must be under stress and I should be the one who understands first. She reminded me that families require compromise. Her compromise always seemed to come from me. Dad offered silence instead of opinion. He sat at the table listening to these exchanges, but his gaze stayed low. That silence created a weight I had to carry alone. It suggested that disrupting the peace was worse than being diminished. The worst moment of that week did not happen with family. It happened when my friend Renee noticed I seemed distracted during lunch. She had not been involved in the preparations and did not know the long history that shaped these dynamics. When she asked how things were going, I gave her a light summary of the situation. I said the planning was nearly done and everything should be fine. She listened carefully and asked a few small clarifying questions. Only after that did I mention the comments, the tone, the constant quiet correction of where I stood in relation to everyone else. Renee's expression changed, not with anger, but with concern sharpened by clarity. She said, "If they do not appreciate you, then why are you still doing all of this?" Her question sounded simple, but it opened something in me. I searched for the answer and realized I did not have one that sounded healthy or strong. I told her I wanted everything to be perfect for the family. I wanted to belong in a way that felt secure, even if I had to earn it. Renee looked at me without judgment, but she did not soften her position. She said, "You do not have to prove your place to people who benefit from denying it." Her words settled into my thoughts and did not leave. Even with her encouragement to walk away, I continued. I went to every remaining appointment, finalized every detail, and convinced myself it mattered to finish what I started. I believed that completing the task might create a small shift in how I was seen. I wanted to believe effort could transform how love was expressed. As the week drew to a close, the preparations moved toward completion. All that remained was the ceremony itself. The day before the ceremony unfolded like a final sprint after a long race, the kind of day when every small detail felt more delicate than usual, as if the wrong word or misplaced ribbon could tip the entire celebration off balance. I arrived at the Charleston Waterfront Ballroom early because I had agreed to help with the last run-through of the decor and the schedule. The air inside held that familiar blend of floral perfume and polished wood, layered with a low hum of movement and anticipation. Marissa was standing near the mirrored wall with a makeup artist and a stylist hovering at her side. When she saw me, her eyes moved from my face to the garment bag I carried. She asked to see the dress I planned to wear for the rehearsal dinner, her tone already implying that approval was not guaranteed. I laid the dress out carefully, the soft fabric spreading smoothly across the table. It was modest, simple, and chosen because I thought it would complement her color scheme rather than draw attention. Marissa studied it for longer than necessary before she said that it was too plain, too understated, and not suitable for photographs. She mentioned that this was a high-profile event that many of Evan's business associates and their families would be attending, and that it would reflect poorly on her if any part of the visual presentation seemed inconsistent. Her words felt clinical and rehearsed, as if she had prepared this speech well before I even arrived. Evan joined the conversation a moment later, commenting not on the dress itself, but on what he believed it represented. He said something about appearances shaping perception, about the importance of aligning the image of the family with the success they wished to project. His tone was smooth, almost friendly, but the meaning pressed sharply against me. I realized they were trying to mold me into a supporting character, someone visible but silent, present, but without significance. I tried to explain that the dress had been chosen thoughtfully, that I wanted to support them and make this day work. My voice was steady, but I could feel the growing tension in my chest. Marissa cut me off, saying she had already arranged for an alternate outfit that would match better. She handed me a dress that was nothing like my style, tight, glittering, and designed to draw eyes for reasons that felt more mocking than celebratory. She told me to be gracious and cooperative, as if my resistance would somehow prove their assumptions about me. When Mom walked over, I hoped she might mediate, but she merely placed a hand on Marissa's arm and told me we should avoid unnecessary conflict. She reminded me that weddings were stressful and that Marissa had a lot to manage. Dad stood slightly behind her, hands in his pockets, eyes down, avoiding any part in the disagreement. I understood the message with painful clarity. I was expected to bend because that was the role assigned to me. I carried the substitute dress to the restroom, and for a moment I stood alone, feeling the quiet thicken around me. I looked at myself in the mirror, not crying, not breaking, just trying to understand why I was still convincing myself that all of this was worth enduring. I told myself that tomorrow, when everything unfolded and the vows were spoken, I might feel like I belonged even just a little. I changed into the dress they chose, walked back into the ballroom, and acted as if nothing inside me had shifted. Everyone else moved through the space as if they were already celebrating. I moved with them, though every step felt heavier than the last. It was one day before the ceremony, and I was already disappearing. In the soft sound of strings and the warm glow of chandeliers, I made my way through the ballroom to find my seat. The Charleston waterfront ballroom shimmered with an elegance that should have felt like celebration. Laughter moved from table to table, and glasses clinked with gentle chimes. Guests leaned toward one another with practiced poise, exchanging compliments, praises, and pleasant formalities. Yet beneath that polished surface was a tension I could feel the moment I stepped inside, thin as thread, but unmistakable to the one who had been holding it for too long. I passed tables filled with people I had coordinated, contacted, organized, and reassured throughout the planning process. They greeted one another with warmth, but when they saw me, their eyes shifted as if my presence reminded them of something they did not wish to acknowledge. Still, I searched for my table with a small hope that the ceremony itself would wash away the unspoken distance that had grown around me. When I reached my seat, I saw the place card before anything else. It was positioned neatly against the folded napkin, lettered in the same elegant script that I had selected weeks earlier during a late-night call with the stationery designer. But the name printed on it was not mine. It was not any name at all. It read, "Stupid, low-educated little sister." The words felt impossibly loud, though no one spoke them. A short, strained laugh broke from somewhere to my left. Someone across the table lowered their gaze, yet a faint smile betrayed the amusement curling at the edge of their lips. The laughter spread subtly, carefully, as though wrapped in polite restraint, but its cruelty was unmistakable. It was the kind of laughter designed to exclude, to define the boundaries of who belonged and who existed only to be compared. I did not speak. I did not sit. My hands rested on the back of the chair, steady in a way that did not feel like calm, but like shock trying to hold me in place. Marissa saw me, and her expression shifted into something that resembled a smile, though it carried no warmth. There was a glimmer in her eyes, a triumphant satisfaction that told me this moment had not been accidental. It was intentional. She wanted me to see it. She wanted others to see me seeing it. Beside her, Evan did not laugh. His reaction was quieter but sharper. He watched me with the measured detachment of someone evaluating how much damage a single scene might cause to an image he valued above relationships, above sincerity, above dignity. His silence was not neutral. It was approval. The music continued. The glasses continued to sparkle. Yet the air around our table had changed. For a moment I considered sitting down and pretending it meant nothing. I thought of the late nights tying ribbons, selecting linens, finalizing vendor changes, and rewriting schedules at dawn. I thought of the times I told myself that love and belonging were things one could earn if they simply tried harder, gave more, sacrificed, quieter. But something inside me shifted, subtle yet solid, like a door that had been left unlocked finally clicking shut. I stepped back from the table. I was going to leave, and then the doors to the ballroom opened. A man entered, steady in his movement, purposeful in his presence. This was Caleb, my partner, and the primary investor behind the company Marissa and Evan had built their ambitions upon. He did not raise his voice yet. The energy in the room changed as soon as he stepped inside. Conversation slowed. Heads turned. Even the music seemed to soften. He approached the table, saw the place card, and read it without touching it. His gaze lifted slowly, meeting Marissa's first, then Evan's, then the guests who had laughed, and now sat motionless. His voice was calm and clear. "It seems we should talk about something you never bothered to understand," he said. "Especially about what holds your company together and what happens when the foundation is removed." Marissa was the first to react. Her smile faltered, the confidence in her posture collapsing as realization settled into her eyes. She stepped forward, voice strained as she tried to sound composed, insisting that the place card had been a harmless joke and that everyone was reading too much into it. But there was no laughter left to support her now. Evan's face drained of color. His hand tightened around the back of his chair as though he were bracing for impact. He understood immediately what Caleb's words meant. Without the investment, their company would not survive the quarter. The future they had paraded all night began to fracture in real time. "Wait," Marissa whispered, reaching out. "We can fix this. Don't go." Caleb looked at her, then at me. We walked out together. The ballroom remained silent behind us. 3 weeks after the wedding, everything that had been carefully staged to look effortless began to unravel in ways that could not be hidden. I heard the news in fragments at first, pieces carried through mutual acquaintances and industry whispers until the full picture took shape. Caleb had formally withdrawn his investment from the company that Marissa and Evan had spent years promoting as their shared legacy. His decision was documented clearly, professionally, and, without malice, in the official statements that followed. There were no accusations, no public spectacle, only a precise acknowledgement that he could not continue supporting a business led by individuals who treated others with disregard, especially someone he cared for. The loss of his backing created an immediate shock within the company's internal structure. Their liquidity had already been tight, held together only through projected revenue and the confidence of future partnerships. Once Caleb stepped away, several investors who had entered the deal because of his presence reconsidered their positions. Meetings that had been full of ambition turned into urgent discussions about emergency capital, restructuring plans, and the risk of default. Vendors began requesting faster payments, and consulting firms withdrew their services when invoices remained unsettled. The polished image that Marissa and Evan had shown at the wedding shimmered and cracked under scrutiny. The press coverage did not begin maliciously. It started with a short industry note regarding a strategic investor exit. However, investors talk, and so do clients, and soon articles appeared questioning management stability. A few days later, an internal dispute leaked disagreements between Marissa and Evan over financial decisions and accountability. Their disagreements became louder, more frequent, and more difficult to hide. While they had once presented themselves as a unified, aspirational couple, their conversations turned into arguments about blame, oversight, and reputation. At home, the tension grew. I did not witness these moments directly, but I heard enough through the family to imagine the atmosphere: raised voices behind closed doors, long silences during dinner, separate bedrooms. The marriage that had been celebrated with cameras, speeches, and applause began dissolving into distrust. My mother attempted to speak to me only once during this period. She chose her words carefully, as though acknowledging the situation too clearly would make it more real. My father said even less, but his silence felt different than before. It carried the weight of someone recognizing something too late to change it. Marissa eventually reached out. Her message was long but uncertain, circling around the idea of wanting to talk and clear misunderstandings. She wrote that she had not expected things to escalate, that she never meant harm, and that family should stay together during difficult times. I read her words slowly, letting them settle, but I did not reply. I understood that what happened at the wedding had not been an isolated moment. It had been the clearest expression of what had always existed beneath the surface. Caleb never framed his decision as revenge. He told me one evening as we sat together quietly that dignity matters in both love and work. Choosing to protect it was not cruelty. It was clarity. And clarity once found is not something you return from. A long time passed after everything that unfolded in the weeks following the wedding. The intensity of the events gradually dissolved into something quieter, and my life rearranged itself without the presence of the family I once kept chasing. The distance did not begin with a dramatic declaration or a final confrontation. It simply began with stillness. A stillness in which I allowed myself to acknowledge that I was no longer obligated to return to a place that had never welcomed me fully. I rented a small apartment near the harbor where the windows opened to the sound of water against the docks. The mornings came gently there, and for the first time in years I woke without rehearsing how to earn my place among people who insisted I already fell short. I learned how to cook only for myself, how to fill my evenings with books, walks, and quiet music. There was no grand transformation, no sudden revelation of who I was meant to be. There was simply space and the ability to breathe inside it. Caleb and I did not become the center of each other's existence. Our relationship continued, but in an unhurried way, free from the pressure to prove anything to anyone. He did not rescue me, and I did not cling to him. We chose each other in the sense that we allowed presence instead of demand, understanding instead of obligation. Sometimes we shared long conversations about work, art, and mistakes. Other times we sat quietly together without needing to speak. It was companionship, not dependence, and that distinction mattered more than I had realized before. I did not return to my parents' home for holidays, nor did I feel the need to explain my absence. There was no hostility and no longing either. Messages arrived occasionally, written with a tone of cautious politeness rather than affection. I answered only when necessary. I did not avoid them out of anger. I simply recognized that peace cannot grow where dignity is treated as negotiable. Some distances are not punishments. They are boundaries finally respected. The world continued for everyone else as well. The life they built shifted along its own path without my presence, and I let it. I had spent so long believing that family required sacrifice at any cost that I failed to realize love without respect is not love, but dependence disguised as tradition. What I gained was not victory nor triumph, nor the satisfaction of seeing consequences unfold. What I gained was the understanding that my value did not need to be proven to those unwilling to see it. I had been enough before anyone decided otherwise. The lesson I came to understand is simple family does not ask you to shrink yourself or to endure humiliation to be included. Affection that demands silence in the face of disrespect is not affection worth keeping. Every connection, whether bound by blood or choice, must begin with mutual respect. Without it, there is no foundation strong enough to hold the weight of love. Thank you for staying with me through this story. I know experiences like this can stir many memories, questions, or emotions. If something in my journey resonates with your own, I would be grateful to hear your perspective. You are welcome to share your thoughts in the comments. I will read them gently.